everyone, this is Sophia Smallstorm back again with another podcast, and as I had done once before, I have the same guest on again in the same month, and that is really in a kind of popular demand. People really liked the last interview I did with John Kaminski, so I invited him back to continue it. Actually, he was mainly interviewing me in that last interview. I'm somewhat ashamed to say, embarrassed. What should I be, John?
Proud. You should be proud.
Proud. Okay, proud. All right. But yeah, we didn't get to hear as much from him as listeners may have wanted, so he's back again. How are you?
I'm well for the condition I'm in.
Okay. Do you mean your advanced age?
That has something to do with it, I'm sure.
Well, let's go back in time then. We were going to talk today about an early time in history, an early age.
Yeah.
Maybe people didn't fall apart as readily back then. 415 A.D., around then.
Oh, Hypatia.
Hypatia, that's right. So do you want to start talking and explain to listeners why we pinpointed that time in history and where this interview may go?
Yeah, I think I'd take it in a much broader way than that. Starting out with who I am, what I do, and what I'm interested in.
Okay.
One of my major hobbies throughout my life, since maybe around 1980, has been ancient history. I started out looking for Druids, and they took me back through the Cambridge ancient history into Babylon and then over into Egypt. And I'm not really a degreed person in either ancient history or archaeology or any of that stuff, but I've always been fascinated on you could say, the origins of things, although I'm not really that interested in the origin of the human species, like the story that Lynn Margulis tells in What is Life about how blue-green algae led to the creation of human beings by excreting oxygen. Prior to that time, there was no oxygen on the planet, and blue-green algae thrived on it, and they sacrificed themselves to improve the conditions for organic life. And from that and through a lot of other material, I've learned that there's something mysterious about the planet Earth in terms of helping life survive and creating the exact conditions for life to survive, the right electric frequency, the right mixture of oxygen and other elements in the air to make plant and animal life thrive. Anyway, I've kind of given up on that really ancient stuff and kind of focused in on the creation of human civilization. And that means trafficking in ancient Egypt and Sumeria, Sumer, I meant to say. And I'm not, like I say, I'm not really a scholar. I'm kind of a dilettante. I just pick up information as I go. And lately I've picked up some rather fascinating information that we were sharing about John Lash and his analysis of the Nag Hammadi codices, which were discovered in Egypt in 1945 and created a very different picture than the Old Testament or any of the standard versions of ancient history, where he describes a kind of a magical force. I don't remember the label he put on it, the magical force from outer space named Sophia, who was riding along the etheric currents in outer space and decided to, on impulse, embrace the Earth as her, I'm probably getting this story really screwed up, embrace the Earth as her pet project and infuse her essence into the Earth, which I found a very attractive myth, because it kind of dovetailed with the idea that we have of Mother Nature being the symbolic entity that represents planet Earth. Now, the way John Lash tells it and the way the Nag Hammadi Codex tells it is that when this magical entity named Sophia decided to do that, she accidentally created these other, I don't know what you'd call them, beings or things or forces, called the archons, who kind of followed her around and were watching what she was doing. The archons couldn't do anything on their own, but they kind of watched Sophia do her thing and animate the planet Earth. And as time went on, it seemed that the life forms on planet Earth were becoming rather unruly. So then these archons decided to add some stability to Sophia's creations and came down into the Earth plane, the chief archon of which was somebody who's known as the Demiurge, who became Ayaldabaoth, who became Yahweh, who became this god that became the ruling king of the Old Testament. But the way Lash tells it and the way the Nag Hammadi tells it is that the Demiurge, or Yahweh, was an imposter because he hadn't created the earth. He'd watched Sophia do that. And this whole myth appealed to me because it gave a feminine aspect to the kind of mythological creation of the earth that is missing in the Old Testament version, where women are enslaved and viewed as property and aren't. Their viewpoint is almost never represented in history. And then jumping ahead from all of that to Hypatia, who was the librarian at the Library of Alexandria, who was slaughtered by Christians when Christians had taken over the Roman Empire and were busy taking over the world in 4 something A.D. John Lash very correctly said that was the beginning of the Dark Ages, and it was the end of all the mystery religions that had dwelled on the earth prior to the imposition of the Christian complex, which still in many ways rules us today. And I told all that background to say that I've always been disturbed that religions cause more trouble than they solve. And especially since we've got Hebrews seriously involved with the creation of Christianity and also the creation of Islam, I've always had this suspicion that all of the monotheistic religions were somehow created as a set to guarantee that the world would remain in constant strife, and the people who created all of this would profit off of this constant strife. And of course, it's easy enough to take that up till today, where we see endless wars. There's really never been a time in our lifetime, and maybe there's never been a time in the history that we can remember where there haven't been serious wars going on. And it's like we look at them now and we think this is really just human nature. But when we look at the people we love and the people we respect, we think this is not how they want to live. Why do we have all these wars going on? And I'm convinced. Let me just finish. I'm convinced in this day and age that we have a serious psychological deformity that causes us to constantly fight each other, that really traces back to the creation of these religions.
All right. Well, you did loosely relay the John Lash Sophia concept.
Right.
Sophia was an aeon.
An aeon, thank you.
Yes, so now we have to say what an aeon is.
What is an aeon?
An aeon, I would guess, is some kind of universe, goddess or spirit, energy, entity, all those things. Yep. And she dreamed up this green and blue orb in the universe.
She dreamed it up.
It was her... Pardon?
She dreamed it up.
It was her creation, and she created it as aeons are able to create things, I guess. And she fell in love with it so much that she fell into it. She became it. So what he points out, Lash, about what we call the pagans, and we think paganism is like dancing in the woods around toadstools. But the early Gnostics, they believed in a living, conscious connection to the earth in the absence of moral codes, doctrines, and institutional authority. Now that's a phrase directly from the Lash book. The Lash book is called Not in His Image.
Right.
And someone recommended it to me as the best place to start if you wanted to understand what Gnosticism really was about. So, we have lost that connection with the earth. There is a planetary life force, what you alluded to at the very beginning of the interview. It's very mysterious, it's very powerful. The interactivity of so many different systems on this planet, of biology and then of beyond biology, even in the realm of metaphysics, the meta-energy of what's going on here is really quite wondrous if you allow yourself to feel it. But so many human beings today have lost that awareness, and I'm not exactly sure why, if it's a product of the culture or that we have now had this invasion of technology which takes us away from our true essence. But I'll read another paragraph from the Lash book, this concept of salvationism.
Right.
And that is central to the monotheism, which you're calling the new monotheism, which has a superhuman God and a Savior for whom and in whose name or names tremendous wars have been waged. So, I'll read from Lash. After the Roman Empire merged with the Catholic Church, war crimes became legitimated in the name of the Savior. Perpetrators adopted the Salvationist creed for religious cover in order to sanction their actions through a superhuman authority. They turned their victims into criminals, condemning the most threatening ones as heretics, and targeting all pagans just because they were pagans. Infected by the ideological virus of salvationism, native Europeans entered a path of self-annihilation, and the so-called Dark Ages followed. From our current perspective of time and historical distance, is it difficult to imagine how a people could attack and dismember their own culture and annihilate the very foundations of their cultural and historical existence? But if we could imagine how that happened, might we not better understand what we are currently doing to ourselves today on the global scale?
Yeah.
So I was fascinated by this term, transhuman, he uses, and superhuman, referring to this deity, this God, who resides off the planet. I mean, hey, the thing we worship and pray to and want to return to is not even on this planet.
Those were the things, the beings, whatever you want to call them. They weren't aeons. They were, I guess, archons, who were created exactly at the same time when Sophia, as Lash calls her, decided to become the earth. They were created somehow inadvertently, and they are non-organic things.
That's right. They were offshoots of her making of, I don't know if it was humans. I mean, I could go grab the book and try to find it, but they were incomplete creations of hers.
Yeah.
And so they stayed not human. They didn't have the compassion that humans generally have for one another.
To introduce a sense of order into the world, because supposedly Sophia had lost control of all the burgeoning forms of life. I just read that today, actually.
So this idea of a superhuman deity, to me, is very interesting. And that it's not on the planet and that we worship it. And so many people worship what I call the unigod or the monogod.
Yeah.
And they live for it, and they discount what they do on Earth. This is when I met you many, many years ago.
Right.
This is what you started to discuss with me, the
Yeah.
Ernest Becker
Yeah.
book, Denial of Death.
Right.
So do you want to summarize that so people know what we're talking about?
People, he postulated that people have a religion for one reason only, is to control their own fear of death and to reassure themselves that after they die they're still going to be safe. And that causes them to twist themselves into shapes that aren't necessarily natural or healthy. And of course we see that with religious fanaticism all over the world. You got the Muslims beheading people, you got the Christians slaughtering whole races of men, and you got the Jews after everybody. And there's the Buddhists and the Hindus aren't excluded from this because they have plenty of violence in their history. But the killing is done as it is. Let me just take the Muslims as an example, for defaming one's own religion. And many people in the world consider that ample cause to kill somebody because their beliefs don't match up. And it struck me very early in my teens, I think, that this was about the stupidest thing in the world, because there's only one God, there's only one creator, if you want to look at him that way. And for everybody to get hung up on their own interpretations of it is the height of folly and evidence of priestly insincerity that hoodwinks people into believing that their mode of belief is the only proper way to show respect for the creative force that has created this wonderful planet we live on.
Right. Lash uses the term hidden superhuman prerogatives.
You could.
Yeah, so we have these moral and metaphysical concepts that imply superhuman perfection.
Right.
And then one of the lines that he had that really jumped out at me was, those who adopt this standard must stand against humankind at large.
Yeah.
They must, in effect, reject their own humanity for a superhuman ideal.
Mm-hmm.
And now we see this transhumanist movement, where we're going to be merged into technology to become superhuman, super functioning. And honestly, my discussions with other people, and I have read most of the Lash book, once he got into the Archon stuff, it wasn't as gripping for me. Maybe I'm not advanced enough a thinker. But the Archons are apparently inorganic. They are not the same as we are by any means. And so that suggests